what CSRD is really trying to do is provide the most, at this stage, comprehensive regulatory framework for corporates and eventually financial institutions to report their impact. So not only how environmental issues and social issues are affecting them and their performance, but also how their operations are affecting things outward. So that's quote unquote double materiality. So that's both the impact of those things on the company and the company's impact on those things. Now, under CSRD, there are recently released 12 ESRSs. So those are the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. So those 12 ESRSs are a set of guidance spread around topics, so environmental, social, and governance topics, so that when a company does their materiality assessment and they identify climate change or their supply chain or corporate behavior as a material issue to them, then there's a set of guidance within an ERS for each of those topics on what information they should be reporting. This is both a set of qualitative information, such as the policies they have in place, how that information is used to inform management decisions, and a set of quantitative metrics as well. So that's the idea. With CSRD, it's again a way to get to that comparable and consistently reported information across companies. Again, the way that the EU is looking at it is this aspect of double materiality. So companies will both report in terms of climate change, the impact of climate change on their operations and their future financial performance, as well as what they're doing, how that further potentially exacerbates or mitigates climate change happening globally. Currently, that is obviously only affecting companies in the EU, and it's the only, specific comprehensive reporting law. Now, some other jurisdictions have mandated things like reporting against the TCFD, which is the Task Force for Financial-Related Climate Disclosures. I might have gone that backwards, TC. Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. But now TCFD should be a part of what's included in the CSRD, and will also be a part of integrated into the ISSB. So the ISSB is the International Sustainability Standards Board. I think I've gotten that right. And they've just released their starting frameworks, and these will hopefully be a part of the same way that the accounting standards are regulated around the world. The difference between ISSB and CSRD is that aspect around materiality. So CSRD is that double materiality aspect. ISSB is just around, we'll call it single materiality. So that is just the impact of those material issues on the company's performance, and you can understand that because it's built around the same standards as accounting. So those are the key reporting acronyms that I'll talk about. Then there's the voluntary standards. So these are things that are not yet, in terms of being forced upon companies, but could in the future. And the most recent one, which is probably most relevant for this audience, is the TNFD. Did I get that right? Yeah. Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So in the same way that that previously a couple of years ago we had the TCFD, now it's a similar approach, but around nature-related financial disclosures. So in principle, they're taking the same structure as the TCFD. So it's looking at governance, it's looking at risk and opportunity management, it's looking at strategy, and it's looking at metrics. And what the TNFD has also done is provided a methodology to do that assessment called LEAP, and also provided metric definitions for 14 areas. This is covering biodiversity, nature, species, etc. That is voluntary. There's also the GHG protocol, which is the greenhouse gas protocol. Now that's been around for a little bit longer, and that is the set of definitions in terms of what types of emissions and how they're categorized and measured. So everyone should be, I'm sure, is aware of Scope 1, Scope 2, and 3 emissions, and the GHG protocol sort of, has defined the measurement approach for those. So those are the voluntary standards in terms of how you can report some of those metrics. Then we have the SBTI and the SBTN. So those are the Science-Based Target Initiative. But I think I got the second one wrong. Science-Based Initiative for Nature. Okay, so they didn't not too clever on the second one. Again, voluntary, and this is all about forward-looking targets, obviously. So a very clear framework, a very clear set of rules, in a sense, in terms of if you're going to set a emissions target that aligns now to just a 1.5 degree world or better, and you have, as a company, you are submitting that target to the Science-Based Target Initiative, and then that target gets approved, and then there's a set of rules in terms of keeping that target, in terms of the reporting you have to do against it. Science-Based Target for Nature Initiative is a similar type approach, right? So it's setting out the standards of what needs to go into setting a target. So we've talked about things that are going to set consistency in terms of the data, so historical performance data that investors and stakeholders can review. And now we have the Science-Based Target Initiatives, which are setting standards around the targets that companies are setting. So for the Science-Based Target Initiative around climate targets, it's supposed to have everyone reaching a view on keeping with the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degree world, right? So you couldn't have so that there's, again, a bit of consistency and comparability, and everyone working from, let's say, the same rule book in what a target has to look like. Did I miss one?
No, you have covered all. Well, I'm sure you have missed
many.
And I'm sure you have many ideas, but they're all the ones that we have listed. So let me just ask you one question. Give us, without going into much detail, but what is the connection between the target setting, the accounting such as GAGP, and the reporting? I mean, do companies have to do them all?
So companies currently don't have to do any of them. CSRD won't come into practice until the 2024 or 2025 for 2024 data, and it's only going to affect companies that were captured by the NFRD, or have a certain size or a certain amount of turnover in Europe, and then it'll capture more companies in the future years. A company does not have to set a carbon target that is science-based, that does not get approved by the Science-Based Target Initiative. The Science-Based Target Initiative only has specific guidance for a number of sectors. Not every sector is captured. Yes, you can use the generic guidance. So it's not required, but if I think about my role in terms of supporting companies in terms of their debt capital markets activities, and I hear from investors and I hear from other stakeholders, aligning to these standards, and I'm talking about the voluntary ones, eventually everyone next year will, that are big enough will have to do the CSRD reporting, is quite important. Again, because people want this comparability and they want this consistency. They don't want that a target is set against some other baseline that they can't really compare company X to company Y, or actually be able to make a judgment without having, most of these, I wouldn't say most, I should say some people aren't climate experts, to have to dig into the details of a climate reduction target and understand, if it's even significant in terms of what's happening, across the globe. So the Science-Based Target Initiative, as an example, is helping stakeholders and investors have a better view of what company goals look like in terms of their legitimacy and their ambitiousness. On the data side, I don't think I've come across a company, in a number of years that is reporting their emissions data not in line with the GHG protocols. So I think that's been a really good case study of how a voluntary standard can get consensus and can be used very well. And people now, I think, more than ever, understand the difference between Scope 1 and Scope 2 and Scope 3, and understand what a complete carbon footprint looks like for a company. And you have a lot of understanding and ability to, dismiss companies who have complex value chain, complex supply chains, and saying, well, we're going to focus on Scope 1 and 2 emissions when Scope 3 emissions make up 98% of their impact. So I think that education is apparent, and hopefully we would see the same sort of thing with the other sets of metrics, that are being defined by ISSB and CSRD, that it will increase the awareness and education across stakeholders, investors, the press, whoever, so that you can make a better determination about companies' disclosures, their future performance and the impact that they're having on the world.
So overall, you think it's good that they're out there? Yes or no? They're helpful.
It's helpful.
Okay.
Do I hear complaints from my clients about the resources required to report against this? Absolutely.
Okay.
But it's absolutely helpful.
So let's talk about, well, from the perspective of a company that is possibly using this framework. So Evan, from a Salesforce perspective, give us a little bit of an overview of when these frameworks are being used. Are you experimenting with them? Just, really from the user perspective.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Real quick, does everyone know what Salesforce is? Raise your hand if you haven't heard of Salesforce. A couple. Okay. So we're one of the largest enterprise software companies in the world. We're the market leader in customer relationship management software. We've also acquired companies like Tableau and Slack in recent years to create a digital hub for your company. I'm on the Salesforce Nature team. Sustainability is a core value of ours. And so we have a whole lot of programming on sustainability, climate, and nature. We have been voluntarily aligning with GRI and SASB and other standards for about 10 years now. The last 5 years have been undergoing third-party assurance on a limited set of the most important of those metrics. We do this, we were kind of early in this because Marc Benioff has it as a core personal value, but also we really view it from a corporate value of trust. So the more transparent we can be around our performance on these kind of metrics, the more interest, excitement, and buy-in we get from customers, partners, employees. And when you're in a very competitive employment market for software engineers, et cetera, showing that you're actually living your values and showing integrity to that is incredibly important. The other reason I think that we've been really leaning into standards, so with TNFD, for example, we've been in the initial pilot of companies that have voluntarily started to go through the TNFD LEAP process to see what is this like in practice, is because the internet would not be possible without standards. Like, standards enable a whole set of interoperability that enables markets to come into being and takes nascent ideas from research and then actually codifies what is best practice, and then that's how we get functioning systems at scale. So because of that real belief in leaning into standards, being at the table so you're not on the menu, like we're kind of a big believer in leaning into these processes. The week that the final TNFD recommendations came out, we had an institutional investor that week send us a request for, so what are your impacts and dependencies on nature? Like, well, luckily we had gone through the pilot, so we had at least a version 1 answer of that. So yeah, it's been a great benchmark process for us. It's been a way to help demonstrate leadership among our peers. And then on the product side, it's created new product opportunities for us. We now have a carbon accounting solution that's all standards-based. And that wouldn't be possible if we couldn't get agreement on how to account and measure and manage on these kind of activities.
Thank you. So a different perspective, Siddharth, you have been working on a number of creative. I was reading your bio. You have been in different roles. Now you're working with investors. But from an investor's perspective, and then I will also go from to edit from that perspective. What you think are these tools helping catalyze more investment, more funding? We are not going to cite again the numbers, but the the pot needs to increase. So what is your perspective of the current, that?
Yeah, I mean, institutional investors love this stuff because it provides transparency particularly for publicly held stocks. I'm not going to speak with that hat on. I invest in private companies, and what we see is with the voluntary carbon market, we've all seen there are significant opportunities, but significant challenges. And fundamentally, the fact that it's voluntary means there's a degree of risk that investors struggle to wrap their heads around. What this offers, the Alphabet Super frameworks, particularly the ones around nature, I think you'll begin to see business models that may become investable by early stage investors, growth investors, because large companies are not going to be able to do this by themselves. And an entire industry is kind of sprung up around carbon accounting. I think it's been hugely helpful for companies to lean on experts. Some of these look like consultancies, but some of them are tech-enabled tools laid on top of a consulting model to help go through your entire incredibly complicated business and say, how do we make sense of this? Not everyone has the resource of Salesforce. And I think the same thing's happening with nature. So we're seeing a number of companies that are targeting TNFD compliance, and frankly CSRD to begin with, because that's coming sooner and has more of an implication in 2024. That's been hugely encouraging for us. And it may actually be relevant for some of the voluntary carbon market companies as well, and where you may be, for example, I was speaking to the folks, the good people at Chloris, who have a solution that helps monitor forests. That's great if you're a carbon project, but it could be helpful if you're a corporate with a value chain that touches forests. And so my personal view is I think compliance against EU law is going to be a much bigger driver of corporate action than, maybe we should do this nice thing for the voluntary markets. So I'm quite excited about, and as frustrating as it may be, I'm quite excited about the opportunities.
Okay, so over to you, Edith. Have you seen a change also? How do you think these frameworks will affect the, more investments from companies in taking action in nature and climate?
Great, thanks a lot. So my name is Edith Kiss. I'm co-founder and chief commercial officer at Integrity Global Partners. We are a new mission-driven firm looking at unlocking capital at scale for nature-based solutions. So really looking at the institutional investor sector as well, how to bring them in to scale, and while at the same time raising the integrity. So we do also have a holistic approach. We do not look at just carbon. Carbon is often obviously the major revenue stream and the major pillar of the investment case or business case. But it's important that, we have a holistic approach, and we talked a lot about it. And one of the nice things of this conference that we have the holistic view connecting biodiversity, nature, and carbon. And so in that sense, very happy to see obviously the TNFD. I do remember when it was just a dream or an idea. So very pleased to see that, and with SBTN, hoping that we'll have similar impacts that we have seen with TCFD. So, and obviously we're talking about here at the demand side. We haven't gone into the soup of the supply side. So I might touch on ICVC and VCMI, but we might not have to. That's another soup. Looking at just maybe, so I think it's very important to build a system, obviously. So this is this underlying pillar and the demand side, right? So what is the impact of all this reporting at the end for demand? The TCFD has been very catalytic in my view, in my eyes. I have been in the market for 17 years, so I have seen the compliance and the roller coaster, and it was really catalytic. And when it was made mandatory in France first, it's not a surprise that the French institutions have become leaders in the space. What you can't was already said today, so I think we might pick up some of the points. What you can't, what you don't measure, you can't take action about it. So it was a very first good step. And then you start thinking, okay, what can I do about it? And then comes the next one, which is super important, SBTI, SBTN, so the target setting going forward. Maybe just maybe before I go into the target setting, on the TNFD side, I think also the expectation is that hopefully it will create some incentives. And one of the things I picked up from the recently launched version is on the opportunity side, there is already a hook and a metric about that you can report the value of investments into nature restoration and conservation, which I think is a really good sign, because ultimately, again, you will have a footprint, you will have dependencies and materiality, but you have to somehow show what your actions are on the other side. So in terms of, but again, as we said, I think the biggest impact is how you set targets, and we can go into a little bit about why we have to do that voluntarily, unfortunately, because the governments fail to do that job for us to correct the price signals. So they have a huge impact, and I think a huge responsibility. In particular, so the SBTI, setting the net zero targets, I think have unfortunately missed quite a bit of the opportunity it had in its face. First of all, making quite a lot of confusion around reduction and removal credits, and that was later corrected, but I think did cause a bit of a confusion initially, and frankly, the fact that the beyond value, and there is a lot of work still going on. I think there has been a consultation, results are out, and BVCM, so another one, beyond value chain mitigation, which is broadly the case for offsets or carbon credits use. I think we all would like to see that become mandatory, not just a nice to have, because as you said, a cherry on the cake is not gonna cut it. And again, frankly, I think what is interesting to see in the past few years is how we moved out of the CSR departments and CSR budgets into strategy. And that's what has driven the past few years on the demand side. And I think we need to keep it there. We need to keep it in the financial departments. And therefore, it's key that it's somehow part of a responsible use of credits should be part of a credible net zero and hopefully nature positive strategies. And that's what I think the big opportunity. And I have one more thing, if you are interested. I think the opportunity is totally missed, is looking backwards, because as you said, we have the data now. What about legacy emissions? What about historical emissions? We are beating up the market, carbon market around legacy credits and credits that are becoming obsolete because of the technology. But those companies, and by the way, the GHG accounting is also, I think 10 years ago wasn't as accurate as today. So why can't we just recognize that? And there are some companies taking that leadership role, like Microsoft, I think, and others who say more and more, look, we also have responsibility backwards, and those credits are a perfect solution for it. So I'll just leave it there with some ideas.
This is too good to be true. I'm going to come to you, Evan. You know that I'm going to ask you. What do you think about what Edith was saying, right? I mean, she's there as an investor. Is obviously this is the ideal situation. From a company perspective, how would you be able to make the pitch to your, ambitious and value-driven CEO, but still a CEO of a company, to be able to, for example, extend the responsibility to this beyond value chain area, like the equivalent of the gold claim, for example, VCMI. And to do all that, what would you need to be able to make a strong business case?
Well, compliance is definitely the floor. So where we've got CSRD requirements to disclose things, then that creates not just a requirement and the attention of the CFO's office and our legal team, but it also creates a floor for every conversation. And then a 70,000 person organization having alignment around what the bare minimum is really, really important. The voluntary standards go one step beyond that. And internally, we have all kinds of discussions on how far to go on various programs and target setting and what positions should we take on X, Y, and Z. And even having a voluntary standard normalizes those conversations because, again, with a 70,000 person global workforce trying to get internal consensus on how far to go on something, it's a lot better if somebody else has done the hard work to build consensus on what the standard should be. So, yeah, I'm not going to get into the nuances of, because it's not my job around exactly what our offset strategy is, but I can refer you to the folks if you want to go deep on that. I would just say that, it is a continual work in progress at the company level and in interacting with these different standards bodies, while the burden of having lots of different competing standards has been painful for many folks. We see it as the process of innovation. There's a phase of divergence and there's a phase of convergence. And now we're in a phase of convergence, and it's a long time coming, and we're really excited about it. And it will create even greater rigor and systemic change. We're fully supportive of that. As an example, we're on the sign-on letter for the Make It Mandatory on nature disclosures, yes. And so we're trying to kind of push the market to just require these kinds of performance metrics because that's the only way we're going to actually see change and accountability.
Thank you. Yeah, and good job for being part of that letter. Dan, from your perspective, you see many of your clients coming. How do you think they will react? I mean, is in asking for more, and I think the question is the whole idea is we need more today because we have, two major crises that need financing. So what would be the best, we heard about voluntary, we heard about compliance. Based on your experience, what would get more companies on board?
If we're talking about offsetting, whether we're talking about carbon offsets or nature-related offsets, I'm not, let's just say that I am definitely reflecting my clients' views here, but just like they just said, more standards are needed. There's a lot of risk aversion, obviously in the corporate world, of getting it wrong in terms of having carbon credits that, like we've seen in the news over the past couple of months, turned out to not have the stringent measurement or baselining behind it. And no company wants to have their name next to, being a purchaser of those credits. And carbon, is relatively easy compared to potentially biodiversity credits. And so the standards are not just a thing that, it doesn't absolve responsibility from doing the work and ensuring that whether it's a carbon offset, that it actually is mitigating what you want to mitigate and you're still doing the same reduction activities that you should be doing anyway. It doesn't absolve those responsibilities, but a regulatory standard behind it that provides, again, a set of rules that everyone can follow and agrees to, even if they aren't perfect, removes some of the risk. And so if you remove some of the risk, you probably open up more investment flows. And it's not something and this is more my personal view now, it's not something that you need to get carbon right before you can move to biodiversity, but you've now had 20 plus years of carbon credits, something like that, where the voluntary mechanisms in terms of different verifiers, in terms of different standards, removal versus avoidance, hasn't led to the outcome that they were supposed to lead to. I think everyone can agree to that. And if you set a rule book, as you just said, that's the floor. So companies can go further, not just on what they would purchase, but the companies that are verifying, the companies that are doing the projects can, of course, go further. And that can be helpful. On the biodiversity credit side, there's going to be a lot more challenges. Again, companies want to have an impact where they operate. So this was just, I'm going to try to replicate a quote of my colleague that was in Bloomberg recently. Like, you're not going to have a company in England that wants to have a biodiversity credit in Mexico, right? Companies most of the time want to have that local impact. And with biodiversity credits, it's going to be a bit more challenging to get that measurement and that verification. But again, if you can set the standard of what that verification and that measurement has to entail, and then you can set up that for local standards, you remove some of the risk. And companies are doing the work, in my view, the companies that I work with, to minimize their negative impacts, but they can't minimize it away and keep operating, unfortunately, at this stage. So the offset market is important. And standards and government support for those standards, so it makes it mandatory, not voluntary, will help because it reduces the risk, and it's reputational risk now, but it's also risk of not having the impact that these companies thought they would.
Thank you. I love this idea that these standards actually help lower the risk, and therefore they're not an obstacle, but they're really actually a tool in the hands. And by eliminating or lowering the risk, you actually free more capital to do something good rather than managing that. So from your perspective, Siddharth, what is can you have a correlation between businesses that actually go all into using these standards and level of innovation and creativity?
It's a big question. I'm not sure.
I just made it up, so it was not in the script.
That's probably true in the sense, Salesforce is sitting right here. Generally speaking, companies that have internal teams that think about this stuff tend to also be thinking about other stuff that's coming down the pike, and that's a good thing. What's interesting about this conversation is these are 4 people who spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I think we're in a bubble where I sort of knew what these acronyms were. I think obviously we have varying degrees of expertise. Dan's the expert, but I think the truth is for a lot of companies, there's a long list of priorities, and this is quite low down, and you can see why. High interest rate environment, inflation, geopolitical stuff. So I get it, and I think ultimately we need this. I mean, the make it mandatory point, I totally agree with, because at the point where this is regulation, I mean, any CFO says, who's making me do it, and what's everyone else doing? And if the answer to those things is you have to do it, and everyone's doing it, it will get done. And so leaders are great. That's what I worry about.
Yeah, and I think you're right to worry. I mean, and definitely something that keeps also awake the organization I work for, which is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And our work is really to digest these complex systems and try to make them, simplify them, and and get companies to understand. So we do this at the global level, but we also have 60 national associations. So if you're a business and you're interested in seeing where we operate and get, also help in understanding how to implement TNFD, TCFD, SBTI, SBTN, GRI, and the whole list, they can certainly help you. Maybe we have 5 minutes to ask a few questions to the public. There is a question here. Easier. Easy? Not to me, because there are this.
Thank you. Hi, Jos Lemmens. You know, I'm a consultant. One remark first, to add to the alphabet soup. You didn't mention SFRD, which is the Sustainable Financial Disclosure Regulation. But I think it's the consumer of the CSRD, right? So the financial institutions will have to comply with SFRD. So they need their investee companies to comply with CSRD. So that will make that wheel fly. I think it's very important. But my question was actually for Salesforce. So you've complied with the CSRD. You have also looked at the TCFD, TNFD. So how do they work together? Is it that if you have done TNFD, then CSRD is easy, or is it rather you have to do almost twice as much? Can you give us a perspective on that?
So it's hard to answer on CSRD because we're in the process of figuring out how exactly we're going to go about meeting all the requirements, given that we're in many different countries and and slightly different nuances between countries, etc. I will say in general that the measurement and disclosure muscle is something that companies get better and better at over time. And as this moves from voluntary narrative statements to quantitative regulatory requirements, then things like data provenance and data governance and auditability verification of this stuff gets even more and more serious and gets more and more investment. And so as I think you're going to see a lot of companies start to make investments in making sure their claims are bulletproof, whereas in the past they might have been below the radar and hoping the Guardian doesn't come after them or something, So the other thing I'd say, so I work really closely with our product teams to kind of see, what are the emerging technologies around this. And if you've gone through Scope 3 emissions, there's a lot of data you've got on your operations and suppliers that then adding an additional information about nature impacts is additive, and you're not starting from scratch. I will say the biggest difference is it's place-based. And so you go from kind of global things on a spreadsheet to you've got to look at maps and you've got to look at places and you've got to look at change over time. And those data sets, a lot of folks are not familiar with. People do not have in-house GIS teams. And so, for all the consultants out there, you've got a very strong business ahead of you on nature, because it's just it's very different analysis. And everybody's mentioned lots of different data sets that are different pieces of the puzzle. So there's going to be this additional complexity, but if you've got the operational data pretty well buttoned up on the Scope 3, Scope 1, 2, 3 carbon accounting side, then you're off to a really, really great start.
I've also got a question for Salesforce. So I work for BAT. My question is, how are you bringing the rest of your organization along on this journey when, like you guys have discussed, there's an alphabet soup of different acronyms, LEAP methodology, we haven't even discussed the bits underneath the LEAP. So how do you bring the rest of your company, like your management board or even just your employees, along for that journey?
Yeah, so a few thoughts. So one is, thankfully, TNFD and SBTN and GRI, and they're all talking to each other, and they're all aligning around common indicators and common metrics, so thank God. So that's a huge help, so that we aren't solving for different things for different standards entirely. That said, and you'll hear this from the TNFD authors, is do not let perfect be the enemy of good. Start with what makes sense. So you start with one line of business initially. You do kind of a first pass of what are the likely most material impacts. Let's start in that line of business, that operation, et cetera. And you just build and build and build over time. And so pilot projects, keeping it small to start has been the message to executive leadership, because everybody wants to do the right thing until the budget and staffing proposal gets there. So that's really been the focus, is kind of what are the most likely material issues. Let's go deep there, and then work down the long tail over time.
Yeah, hi, a question for me. I just moderate. My name's Daniel. And you're doing a great job, by the way, Giulia, as a moderator as well. But
I had a good teacher.
Yeah. So we're discussing that, the climate soup or complexity can be high, even for large corporates. How do you think that, in the coming years, we can also engage SMEs in this market?
For me, I don't know. No, I think it's really, really, really hard. And we've done a little bit of work in a past life. I've done some work with SMEs to try and do climate disclosures. It's really, really hard. Partly, and for me, the biggest challenge has always been there are people who are just incredibly stretched. There's no dedicated person to do this typically. Right? It's a one person job to do 5 different compliance type things, and this might be one of them. Really hard. And I almost think at that point, the best way to approach SMEs is to approach them with a solution. People are thinking of starting companies in this space. I would look there. I truly think kind of off-the-shelf, simple solutions that can, almost provide a package of here's what you should do, and we can help you through the whole journey. It's probably the way to do it, because it's very, very hard to add internal capacity.
Like the kind of taxation systems, right? Predefined module. Yeah.
TurboTax for X, and then you choose your acronym.
And in this, every ton counts. So I think that's the whole idea of cumulative impact on opportunities. I mean, nature, we talked about often sectors where they're small enterprises, but collectively they have a huge impact. Therefore, is also how do we create this coalition? But maybe you have a good idea there. You from the experience of a bank?
Yeah. So I think lenders and investors can really help on this. So it's not my product, so it's not me promoting myself, but it's my bank. NatWest has a carbon accounting tool for their SME clients, right? So it's one starting piece of the beginning of the journey, but that's a starting point. I know that there is driving elements within the VC community of setting up programs and how you start reporting at that very starting stage for companies. So investors, VCs or private equity firms will have the resources that they can spread across their portfolio to help with that journey. Now, it's not going to be something like Salesforce doing everything at once, but starting with the basics, right? And the basics are simple things, well, not simple, but are things like carbon accounting, because that's going to be quite universal, I think, and there are, hopefully enough tools now, and it's going to be, the starting points that are a bit more qualitative, like things like a materiality assessment. I know we're at the Biodiversity and Forestry Conference, but, if we talk about sustainability more broadly, those are the types of things that can be done that are not resource intensive, but can start to, for SMEs, define the topics that are going to be material to their growth. And what we're seeing with a lot of private equity firms, and maybe this isn't just for SMEs, is that they set targets for their portfolio companies. So you put the onus on the company that this is going to be material for you, and then using the resources that you have at a PE firm to help them collect that data and report it. So it's not going to be the whole bowl of alphabet soup. I hope I didn't muddle that metaphor, but it's going to be, some of the individual acronyms to start with.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are at the end. We have 5 more minutes. Okay, so we have more time for if there are any other questions. All right, so then I'll ask you a question. First of all, just to get the conversation still going on acronyms, let's go around. Let's maybe starting from Edith. Your favorite acronym that has not been mentioned so far in this hour, because pretty much everything has been mentioned, but
yeah, maybe then I go back to on the demand side. So VCMI, again, I think on the where we are here today, we're discussing about the business case. We need demand. We need to make the business case, and I think there is absolute necessity right now to do more. And VCMI on the demand side integrity, trying to come in to create.
What does VCMI stand for?
Voluntary Carbon Market Initiative.
Integrity Initiative.
Oh. Carbon market
tricky one because he has two eyes.
Sorry,
yes, but it's one, but it's two.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It took.
So
All right, so Evan, you're
sure. I mean, I love them all, but one of my favorites, yeah, because I'm a total dork on this stuff. No, one of my favorites though is I get frustrated with so many of the conversations that are kind of broad brushstrokes and talk in general terms, and I think the state of the art of these conversations is very industry specific. And among the standards bodies that's done the most work on that has been SASB, which is now under the ISSB. They created this industry-specific materiality matrix that I thought was really, really great work. And that really drives really, really candid, pragmatic conversations around in the mining industry, what is possible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which is where I think we need to get to. And more standards are starting to apply a more industry-specific lens to their recommendations, which I think is completely appropriate.
great.
I might actually refuse to answer this question.
No.
No, because I actually think
You can span different sectors. I mean, no. Okay.
I think there are truly too many acronyms.
Okay.
I think we've mentioned most of the main ones. I think
Okay, Dan?
I guess for Sid, it's like choosing a favorite child.
it's very hard. It's really hard. Or least favorite child.
Or least favorite child.
You love them all. That was his answer.
So for me, it's actually not a standard, but it's under SFDR, which was mentioned, which is PAI, which is Principal Adverse Indicators. Now, one, it's a nice thing. You can make so many puns about, like, is this easy as pie, right? And it's not. And two, the SFDR is now under this consultation because from an investor perspective, in terms of what it meant to do in terms of classifying the types of investments that they would be making and the reporting that would be done, it didn't work out. And a big part of that was PAIs that from their investee companies, they were supposed to be getting, indicators, adverse indicators around climate, health and safety, corruption, and the data's just not there yet. And so, we talked a lot about on this panel the reporting that's going to be done, and Edith mentioned with the TNFD, there's positive indicators, which I think is great. You want to see the positive side. So PAI is a fun one. It's principal adverse indicators. It takes a sort of very negative view of what investments are doing. So I do hope that during the SFDR consultation, perhaps there's a bit more on the flip side as well, and takes a page from TNFD on showing that the positive contributions that investments are having as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this. I think we can say that, it is a dry topic to start talking about these things, but these people turn it into something very positive because you really brought your experience, but also your passion about making a difference. And I think what I've heard is that these standards, protocols, frameworks are actually the way to make a difference. I really liked the gentleman here on the front row, his comments about, how these different systems actually talk to each other. And that's exactly the whole point. We have to look at this as a complex system where you need different, elements, and these elements need to talk to each other. So hopefully they will all push more, companies to do more, to invest more. And thank you very much for your attention.